Dana Bash is CNN's chief political correspondent and co-anchor of State of the Union and needed more on her plate. So she has just now launched a CNN limited series podcast on one of my favorite subjects. Dana, I'm so caught up in this California recall. There's not a day that goes by that we don't talk about it here on my program. Your new podcast series is called Total Recall: California's Political Circus. And I've listened only to the trailer, which was hysterical because you force the governor to introduce himself. How many episodes will there be in this limited series?
About 6, possibly 7, but about 6. So it's looking back at the 2003 recall because, Michael, you and I remember it well, but a lot of people don't even remember that Arnold Schwarzenegger became governor because of a recall. It's hard to believe, but it was almost 20 years ago. I mean, it's hard for me to believe. I don't know about you.
When I think of recall, I think of impeachment. I think like, okay, someone has behaved so badly that they've got to go. And, that's not the way it's looked at in California. Was there one straw that broke the camel's back with Gray Davis?
A lot. It was a perfect storm. It was the fact that talk about power. We're talking about, you and I before coming on, we're talking about the reason for the wildfires in California, but there were rolling blackouts and the people of California were furious because they didn't have electricity. And it started in San Francisco and then it just went all across the state of California. And that was an inconvenience for some, but for others, it was really life or death. People who are who rely on electricity for equipment to keep them alive, never mind businesses. That's number one. Number two, there was the recession. Remember the dot-com bubble burst in the early 2000s, and the recession hit California really hard. So there was a big surplus in the California budget, and it went to a big deficit. And what Gray Davis did was, you know what, I have all these Democratic priorities. I'm still going to spend for those, education, a whole bunch of them. And so that made the deficit worse. The biggest probably that added to all of that, you remember, was the car tax. There was already a car tax on the books. And so Gray Davis figured, oh, well, it's already there. So to help with that deficit, I'm going to increase the car tax. Well, you know what Californians love. They love their cars. They need their cars, especially in places like LA. That's where they live in their cars. So to tell them they have to pay more, and it's right there on a piece of paper. Gray Davis even told me this. He explained it. He said when he didn't realize that they would be able to look at a piece of paper that said, this was your car tax before, and this is your car tax increase now, thanks to Gray Davis, basically. And so all of those things conspired to make his poll numbers plummet and the whole state and the whole situation ripe for a recall, which had never happened before, never in California.
And frankly, had only, correct me if I'm wrong, happened one other time in the country, right? This would be only the third time if Gavin Newsom were to be recalled.
That's right. In one of the Dakotas, North Dakota, I believe it was, in the early 1900s. And it's actually, I've learned a lot doing this podcast, and you'll appreciate this. There was a governor about more than 100 years ago now, named Hiram Johnson. And he was Mr. Anti-Corruption. When I read about him, I think that he was like, John McCain in modern day politics. And he pushed a proposition that allowed for the people of California to recall their governor if they don't think that he's doing a good enough job, as you said, allows the people to impeach the governor. And what Gray Davis said to me during this podcast is, so many governors had a threat of a recall. Ronald Reagan, they talked about recalling him when he was governor of California, but it never happened. So he didn't take it seriously for a very long time. And then all of a sudden, the momentum was there because conservative groups, they had money, thanks to Darrell Issa. Remember that the now congressman, the again congressman back then.
Again, right.
was a super rich guy who bankrolled this because he thought he was going to be governor, and then Arnold jumped in, and that was the end of that. And so they were able to get things going in a very big way.
Erwin Chemerinsky, who I think is a brilliant guy, he's the dean at Berkeley, wrote an op-ed and tried to convince folks that this is all unconstitutional. I don't think he'll be successful, or that the litigation that was inspired by his opinion will be successful. But he makes an interesting point. He says, look, Republicans can't win statewide anymore in California, haven't for a long time. And here's a situation where by a 50+1, by a slim majority, they could recall Gavin Newsom, and then by a plurality, maybe it's 15%, you could have Larry Elder or someone else walk into the governor's mansion. That's inherently unfair. And he says, and there's more to his argument, it's also unconstitutional. It is kind of interesting, right? That this is an end run opportunity for Republicans.
It is. And I was just looking at the numbers yesterday for a piece I'm writing around this podcast, Michael, and the voter registration back in 2003. I mean, it was already a very blue state, but the Republican voter registration was like north of 35%. Now it's south of 25%. And Democrats have a 2-to-1 voter registration advantage right now in California. And so that definitely helps support the argument that you just talked about. Having said that, even Gray Davis, I was fascinated by this. He told me, it's just the way it is in California. He said, if you don't want to potentially face a recall, don't get involved in California politics. It's just the way it is. Like, it's as California as avocados and plastic surgery.
The Beach Boys.
And the Beach Boys.
And Van Halen and the Red Hot Chili Peppers. You know, I thought, Dana, as I've paid attention to this from 3,000 miles away, I thought initially that the California Democratic Party was making a mistake in not taking a position on question 2. And I know you know what I'm referring to. This is a 2-question ballot. The first is, and I forget the precise wording, but do you want to recall Gavin Newsom? And then second question is, if Gavin Newsom is to be recalled, then who among this 50-some person field should be elected governor? And the position of the California Democratic Party is to say, we're not even talking about question 2. Don't even vote on question 2. And I thought, wow, that's really interesting. As I've seen the most recent polling data, I'm wondering if they're on to something by casting all the energy on question 1. Will you speak to that?
Yes, it's funny because just anecdotally from Democrats who I was talking to in California, they were skeptical, as you were, about whether or not that strategy would work. Listen, voting in a recall is not simple, as you just laid out. You have on the left side of the ballot, do you want to recall the governor? Yes or no? Full stop. On the right side, you have a long list. This time it's 46 candidates. In 2003, it was 135 candidates in alphabetical order. So you had to search around and find for the person that you were voting for, if you were going to vote yes or no. But it was dicey. It was risky to do that. And when I talked to former Governor Schwarzenegger, I went out to his home in LA a couple of weeks ago. I asked him about this specific question, and he said, nobody knows what the hell they're talking about. He said, this is what is the problem with recalls and trying to direct the electorate to vote in a very specific way. You remember, but by the way, it might turn out, as you said, that he was wrong, that the Newsom strategy would work. Just by way of history, and I know you'll appreciate this, do you remember what Cruz Bustamante did in 2003? So Cruz Bustamante was Gray Davis's lieutenant governor.
Lieutenant, right. That I remember. Okay.
Yeah, both Democrats. He jumped in to the recall race, and he did it, he says, and I talked to him as well, said back then, says still now, it was an insurance policy in case the left side of the ballot turned out to work. And so what his argument was to voters back then was vote no on the recall, but yes on me. No on the recall on the left side, but check my box on the right. And people didn't know what the heck he was talking about. He did come in a distant second to Arnold Schwarzenegger, But it's just a reminder of how confusing these recall elections are. Never mind middle of September.
Right. But when the Democratic Party says don't even vote on question 2, they're putting it all on the line for Newsom, and then essentially allowing a diluted vote to boost someone like Larry Elder or another Republican or an independent, as opposed to, and I totally get it now, because if they instead endorsed someone, then they're kind of conceding, right, that Gavin Newsom might lose this thing. The polling data, I know you know, that I was making reference to a moment ago, is more recent polling data that shows that now Newsom, and this is a race that'll be governed by passion and not by polls. You know, it's are they angry enough to get rid of him? That's going to determine whether he goes. But when you poll Californians now, by a majority, they seem to want to retain Gavin Newsom.
They do. But as you said, the question is getting out the vote. I mean, it's the most cliche thing in politics, and it's cliche because it happens to matter. And especially in a recall race where the electorate is very specific. You have to have people who care enough either to get the guy out or keep the guy in, because it's not a regular election day. And the level of attention on this recall pales in comparison to 2003, because you had the
biggest,
because you had the biggest movie star on the planet back then, Arnold Schwarzenegger, running for governor. You know, it's hard for the youngins who are listening to understand just how humongous a star Arnold Schwarzenegger was. Terminator 3 had just come out, and he had already, and so he had already had, 15 years worth of international blockbuster hits. And all of a sudden, he's the guy running for governor. And although there had been celebrities who had run before, Ronald Reagan was no Arnold Schwarzenegger when it came to his star power at the time. I mean, when it comes to just pure Hollywood star power. And so all of this attention was there. All of this attention was focused, and people knew about it. And for this podcast, we interviewed an LA Times reporter who remembers doing kind of man on the street interviews back then. And he said, let's say there were 10 people I was talking to. People wanted to stop. You know, when you do I don't know if you've ever done a man on the street interview, they're like, I gotta go.
Yeah.
Talk.
Yeah.
Everybody wanted to talk about it. Everybody was invested. Everybody was interested. He said, and like the 2 people who didn't want to talk, it was like legit, my house is on fire or my kids are waiting for me at the bus stop. So it's just not like that now.
I remember meeting Gray Davis post recall. I was interviewing him at one of the conventions for my radio program. And when the interview ended, it stands out in my mind. He handed me his business card, and it said, Gray Davis, California governor, almost like military lingo, retired. And I thought, okay, that's pretty. Maybe he's got a sense of humor. Yes, indeed. He was retired, albeit at the hand of the voters. What does he say, big picture, when he looks back at having lost that recall?
He says that there were lots of things that were out of his control, particularly the power situation. We're going to get into this in the podcast, but remember Enron?
Sure. Yeah.
So one of the reasons for the power problems out there was that his predecessor, Pete Wilson, deregulated the power system in California, which allowed Enron to get involved, and it put the power system on the marketplace. And there were a whole bunch of problems that led to the power struggles, the dire situation that Gray Davis really did inherit. So that was huge. The car tax, he basically admitted that he just didn't see it. He screwed up. He didn't, now he realizes that he actually said to me, I now see when you as a politician or as a government give something to people, you can't take it away. And meaning if you give them a car tax that is $2, I'm just making these numbers up, and you say, I'm going to now make it $10, that's going to make people really angry at you. And he understands that there was widespread anger, and he was the guy in charge, and he did the Harry Truman thing. The buck stopped with me. And it just, it sucks for me, basically. Those are my words, but that's effectively what he said. And you know what's really interesting, Michael? He and Arnold Schwarzenegger are good friends. They are good
Yeah,
friends.
I know they have a relationship.
Yeah.
I know Arnold told me. I know. It doesn't surprise me with regard to Arnold, though. I mean, he's that kind of a gregarious, loves to have the conversation kind of guy.
It is, but you know, it's also a reminder, because what happened? The election ended. Gray Davis lost. He conceded. He made what is usually the perfunctory phone call to the guy who won, Arnold Schwarzenegger, and said, you know, if you need anything, let me know if I can help. So those, first of all, those are things that we now should not take for granted, given what happened in 2020. But then they went a whole nother level, and they actually, Schwarzenegger took him up on it, and Gray Davis was happy to help. Schwarzenegger, I'm sure he's told you that Gray Davis really helped him at the beginning of his gubernatorial tenure. And that's pretty remarkable, given the fact that Schwarzenegger took him out like only an action hero can do.
Dana, this sounds fabulous. And I love the story. People who listen to my program here on POTUS, they will also love this. It's a limited series podcast called Total Recall, California's Political Circus. Have you dropped all the episodes, or you laying them out one at a time?
Great question. The first episode, none of the episodes has dropped yet, just the trailer. The first episode comes out on September 8th. So that's next Wednesday. And then we're going to drop each one the Wednesdays that follow.
Awesome. I can't wait to listen to all of them. As I said, I listened to the trailer, and you had me from the get-go because of forcing Arnold to introduce himself. And I won't say what he said, but it's really hysterical. I can just picture the scene where, what did you do? You said, you know, Governor, I need you now to explain who you are. The minute you hear him open his mouth, you know who it is.
Exactly. That's why I think I said something like, okay, I'm going to now ask you maybe one of the top 3 silliest questions I've ever asked in my life. Can you please introduce yourself?
I wish you all good things with it. Of course, people should also be watching State of the Union, both with you and with Jake. It's been too long since you've been here. The last time you were on my radio program, you will not remember this. I will. We were at the Reagan Library in Simi Valley. Maybe you were about to actually anchor a debate. And I just remember, is that what it was? And yes, CNN had like a trailer, a media trailer, and I was able to corral you and do an interview inside that trailer, and it stands out in my mind.
I remember it vividly. We were at the Reagan Library. It was the first CNN debate during the 2016 presidential primary process. And there were so many Republican candidates, we had to have 2 separate nights.
2, right.
Yep. And, one night, 2 separate debates.
2 debates. Yeah. A-team, B-team. Right.
Yeah. And I loved it. I remember it very well. I loved it. And can I just, while I have the floor, I've said this to you privately, so now I have a chance to say it publicly. I learn so much from you every time I listen to your show here, but I watch your show on CNN. It's like, I mean,
thank you.
I like and love a lot of my colleagues' shows, but yours has a special place for me because it's just so darn good. I really love it.
No one wants to hear your compliments except me. So thank you very much. I appreciate it. I will see you soon. I will listen to this podcast. I'm genuinely interested in the subject matter. It's got all the elements. So thank you, Dana, and I wish you good things.
Okay. Bye.
Thank you.